The reason why this is crucial, and I need to pull out your handout, because every single one of us have been somehow influenced and have dialed into the experience of Ferguson, Missouri. I mean, if you follow any social media or TV for that matter, maybe some of you are old-fashioned and actually watch TV, but for all of you who are not social media freaks, you know that this is a major topic. And it has reminded us of the brokenness of our culture, of our society. Now, I want you to hear this very closely because I do have some things to say about Ferguson that I want you to hear them closely and carefully before you label me, before you punch me, or you hug me. I don't know what you're going to do after I speak. But regardless of your reaction, I want you to hear this. I come from a background where I was 17 years old when I came and walked into this country for the first time. I went through the process of getting an international student visa in Matamoros. Back in the day, you could have spent the entire night outside the consulate, the American consulate, and go through the process and hoping that they were going to go through. I remember one year, I went through 3 nights in a row trying to get my visa. So for me to call myself a U.S. citizen, you have no idea what that means. After going through basically 7 years of that experience, total. But here's the thing, I walk into this deal and I spent, a very small time in Arlington, Texas at a private school where I was really pretty much isolated from the Valley culture back in the 90s. And then suddenly, like this abrupt deal, which I wasn't even thinking or preparing myself for, I jumped into this thing called college. And college for me was not only a transition in, academically and dynamically. I mean, I'm not the typical guy who grew up in a home where college was a given. You know what I'm talking about? Like some of you was a matter of where you were going to go to college versus if you were going to go to college. That's not me. So I jump into this college deal where I'm taken from Harlingen, Texas, back in the 1992 into this place called East Texas. And I walk into this country, small community, where everybody listens to this weird music that I'm not familiar with called country music. I know I just offended you, but it's still weird to me, even today. And I'm walking to these places where it's just, anyway, so I'm confronted with the reality of racism. Just differences between skin color, languages, how you talk, how you walk, how you dress. And I was reminded of the reality that when I grew up in a church, in a Baptist church, where racism was also a dynamic. I mean, it's undeniable, wherever you go. So before you come into your conclusions and to your understanding and your judgment of something like Ferguson, Missouri today, I want you to hear this. Because when I was growing up, the racial issue wasn't necessarily ethnicity, because it's like all Mexicans look the same, and they literally, I mean, we all look the same if you move down south. So that wasn't an issue really on this ethnic diversity, but it was more of an issue where I grew up in a culture where you just don't date anyone outside of the denomination. Anybody there with me? No? You came from healthy churches. I just grew up in a church where no Catholics, no Methodists, no Presbyterians, God forbid, Pentecostals. Ooh, no. Big no. You just don't date those guys. You stay within the denomination. And so, if you think about it and pushing this thing forward, it was racial. I just walked into a country where racial issues were magnified. So here's what I want to just say to you, 2 things about this whole Missouri issue, which is tragic and is painful. Number 1, for those who are still struggling and battling, or eventually will battle, the existence of God, this issue of racial diversity, racial or hatred among races, it's just a simple reminder that if you ever remove the presence of God, you create anarchy. Because God, what He does, unavoidably, again, you've got to deal with the discussion. God, what He does, He creates and He establishes the sense of morality. Which implies God determines what's right and what's wrong. And when an 18-year-old boy is taken down like that, you may have your ideas whether it was right or wrong, but here's the bottom line. Regardless of where you're leaning towards, who creates that sense of rightness or wrongness? Who does? It's God. Because who gives the value to life? Why do we value life? It's because of the giver of life. Second thing that I'm reminded, and this is why I want to just kind of focus your attention on this deal. When you look at these riots and this crazy stuff, whether you agree or not, in Missouri, whether you agree with what's happening in the context of this community, I want to remind you that people find meaning in the context of relationships. And just like everything else, those relationships can be truly and totally beneficial. And just, I mean, some of you ladies who have gone through pregnancies or may be going through pregnancies right now, that birth of your firstborn totally changed your concept of life. Like you never saw life again the same way, because the birth of this beautiful creature that really represents the expression of love, the expression of commitment, talking about marriage, the expression of just newness, and just the fact that God will entrust this being into your hands. It's just overwhelming. So that's kind of what the beauty of the deal. But then on the other hand, you go through this tragic situation when you get to bury and put on the ground in love. It's just tragic. It's difficult. And some of you are still, trying to recover from those things. So unavoidably, relationships, they can become, celebrate with beauty and greatness, but also with pain and difficulty and sometimes even grief. So that's what I'm reminded of this event in Missouri. I'm reminded of those two components. Now, why this is important is because on your handouts, every single person, and again, regardless of where we are, we have to deal with three important questions. Three important questions that are extremely crucial in everything we do. The first one has to do with where do we come from. Events like what we are facing right now, they describe or they deal with the understanding of where do we come from. The second question that you have in your handout is a question of what are we? Who are we? What are we? If we have all this crazy stuff happening in the backyard of our very own nation on racial issues, or at least that's the perception that we have, a generation who is out of control, and we have all this crime and all this crazy stuff, who is it that we are in this whole scenario? Some of your children, some of our students are going to be challenged with the understanding of the second question of who we are, because they're going to be bombarded with a lot of stuff in the schools that they will challenge the definition of who we are. Some of you are walking away from relationships who they define who you were or who you are, and right now you're trying to get over them, trying to renew the relationship. Just so you don't confirm what he said that you were. And this is another challenge. But the third one, here we go. The third one is, where are we going? Where are we going? So the first one has to do with where do we come from? The second one is, where are we? Or where is it that we are? And then the third one is, where are we going? What's the direction that we're facing? Now, this is important because, and here's what I want to think for a second. The importance of these questions is they are questions that humanity has wrestled with for, just centuries and centuries and centuries over these questions. But the crazy thing about it is that the answer to those questions is literally found, and this is on your handouts, home. Home. It is home that defines those questions. So here's where I'm going to take you for the next 12 weeks, and I hope that you can join our community, our small groups throughout this week. But here's the thing that I'm going to try to show you. When we delegate the answer to these three questions to anyone else except the home, by default, please listen, by default, you have already answered the questions at home. By you not trying to answer or diverting from the questions, you are answering the questions. Well, what do I mean by that is, if you guys just walk with me for a second, just pull back a little bit and go into your Old Testament Bible history. The book of Samuel is a book that begins in the context of polygamy. One man, two ladies. Not a biblical principle in a sense of universal, it's circumstantial. It's what is called a descriptive, it's not a prescriptive principle. So stop thinking that you can go more than one, guys. No, it doesn't work like that. Ladies, stop. No, it's not going to work. Listen, you have a man by the name of Elkanah having two ladies. One is Peninnah and the other one is Hannah. And Peninnah had two children, and Peninnah became a rival to Hannah because Hannah had none. Now, please listen to me. In the culture of the Old Testament, having children is a sign of the blessing of God. Barrenness is a sign of the opposite, which means, what's the opposite of blessing? It's going to see, it's a curse. So if you are a lady or a family with no kids, that means, now please, pull back with me for a second. Just listen to the context. You are talking of a culture that children only happen within the context of marriage. And once you get married, game on. Not one, not two, not three. How many kids? Just, anyway, so here's the point of the story. You're going to get this context of, again, barrenness from Hannah children from Peninnah. A lot of conflict by verses 7, 8, and 9. Hannah makes a covenant with God. She prays and says, God, if you give me a child and make it a boy, I will consecrate this boy. There will be no razor that goes over his head, the Nazarene goat, and he goes into this, she goes into this consecration, that I will bring it before you, and he will live in your temple forever. He will be within your confines forever. So Hannah gets pregnant. God provides a miracle. And she brings forth a little boy by the name of Samuel. And Samuel, the Bible describes that until he was at age, proper age, is brought from the home into the presence of the priest by the name of Eli. And this priest, by the name of Eli, is the one that is going to deal with this young man by the name of Samuel. Here's the point. The point is that by the time Samuel was at age to come into the presence of the priest, he was already trained, taught, dealt, discipled by his mother. Bottom line, here's where we're going. Home is the place, and this is the place. This is how we have to deal with this deal. This is the place where we have to embrace this and understand this. So on your handouts, what I want you to understand, hey guys, this thing went off. I don't know exactly what happened. Can you guys help me in the back? You can see it went off. This is what I want you to understand. There is a newspaper well and famous by the name of the New York Times. And this is why I want you to listen to this. The New York Times, and I'm going to challenge you to Google this after church, not while you're in church. You can Google this and find that the New York Times has a section called Unhinged. And Unhinged is a section where this newspaper promotes or tells us how divorce is so prevalent and how divorce is not offensive in all these cases of divorce. Well, in the same section of Unhinged, you're going to see the section of marriages and couples getting married. So it's kind of ironic that you have the creation and the disintegration of marriage in one single section. But there's one of the articles that has just called my attention, and I have to share this with you. Within the Unhinged experience, you have an article that is called Together to the Road to Divorce. Now, before I explain to you the article, let me make my quick commercial, which means I go down. I do not believe that divorce is the unforgivable sin. So if you have gone to divorce, just hang on, just stay put. If you think that you will never go to divorce, you probably are, because it doesn't happen by accident. You're going to nurture that relationship. But this is what I'm going to say to you. Just listen to a second. If you disregard the concept or the teaching of these three questions of who we are, where we come from, and where we're going at home, by default, culture is going to answer these questions. So this article, when you look at the image, you're going to see the image of a couple with a child in between. And this couple, which are real cases, they got married in 2000. By the year 2007, it's just not working. It's just not working. So they come into the conclusion that, hey, you gotta be happy, I gotta be happy. And they got to the conclusion to kind of, just go over whatever they need to do in their marriage. Here's the crazy thing. The crazy thing is that they decided, without getting divorced, to explore other relationships. And the article explains that the first relationship she decides to engage with is basically another lady. And now she has a girlfriend. And the crazy thing about it is that the husband, which is legally married to her still, this is New York, so hey, New York, all right. So, still married. When the wife went through the breakup and she was hurting emotionally because the girlfriend left her, who do you think bring consolation to the lady? It was a husband. And then after a while, then she comes up with a new relationship, but now she chooses a man. So she goes back and forth between women and men. And here's the crazy thing. In the article, they explain how now, within the last 2 or 3 years, he finally decided to go ahead and explore other relationships. So now he's also dating. And in the conversation, because it's basically an interview, they describe this whole thing to see if they will potentially or eventually get divorced. And they're saying, I don't know, we'll see. I mean, right now, we're just trying to raise our child. And I'm thinking to myself, you're trying to do what? I mean, explain that to me one more time. You're raising a boy in the context of parents who do not sleep together anymore. They have become pretty much co-parenting, co-workers in parenting, but the relationships are just, out of whack in this regard. Here's what I want you to hear. If you and I disregard the principle we're going to talk about today, culture will answer those questions to each other. I believe that. in other words, what I'm trying to tell you is that culture, and again, I wish I had time to explain this in detail. I am not condemning culture. I do not agree with what culture does, but what I'm going to say is this. I believe culture is doing what culture is supposed to do. In other words, I don't panic when I read articles like this because this is what you're supposed to do because that's who you are. Follow me? Here's where I panic. I panic when Christians do that. I'm like, are you kidding me? You are a follower of Jesus, and you disregard every single thing that Jesus said. So how does that make you a follower of Jesus? That's what I panic. That's why I'm just like, it's not making any sense to me. So here's what I want you to hear from me, because here's where Deuteronomy chapter 6 comes into place. This is the 5th book of the Bible. This is the book that comes after Genesis, which is creation story and a bunch of other stuff that I don't have time to go into in detail. Then you go into Exodus. Exodus is the book where Moses shows up, and Moses is bringing the people from the slavery into the promised land. And then he gives the law in Exodus. Then he goes into Leviticus. See, the law, oh my gosh. The law is given. The first thing they do is they break the law. So God provides, watch this. God provides because the law is broken. People break the law. God has to bring punishment over them because nobody gets exempt or no one is the exception to the rule. But as God provides punishment, God provides a mediator. In the book of Leviticus, which is the 3rd book, the mediator is what is called the sacrificial system. In the book of Numbers, which is the 4th one, God gives him the framework or gives him the systems to become a nation. So political, religious, family-wise, educational, the entertainment, whatever systems are godly and they come from the Lord, come in the book of Numbers. The 5th book, which is where we are, is the book where now Moses is about to go into the promised land. Here's a problem. The generation that he took from Egypt into the promised land are dead, gone. They died in the wilderness because they broke the law. Are you following me on this? So when the Bible describes Deuteronomy, and he's about to take his people into the promised land, the people that he is dealing with are the children of the ones that left Egypt. And that's why Deuteronomy is like a review of what it was said at the beginning in Exodus. It's like a second law, like a review of everything I just told you. And this is where we come into the conversation. Part of the problem of the generation that we see in Deuteronomy chapter 6 is that they are going to love the means more than the end. On your handouts, you have land versus family, because God wanted from the beginning to create a family. He was going to use the land as the vehicle to create this nation or this family. And they ended up worshiping the land instead of the God who provided the land. So today, some of you need to be challenged with this, because you are so enamored with your marriage. And I'm glad you love your marriage. You gotta stop fighting for your marriage. Look at me. You gotta fight for your spouse. Because you can always find another spouse and build another marriage. Okay, I'm not clicking this point. Here we go. Listen to me. Do not fight for your marriage. Fight for your spouse. Because you can always rebuild another marriage with somebody else. Are you following me? You follow, you fight, you embrace, you go to war for the person you chose. And these people, they started fighting, they started getting in love with the land versus the giver of the land, versus the purpose. And the purpose was for them to become a blessing that eventually, in due time, through this land that created this family, brought forth a family. Through this family line, eventually will come a Messiah that will eventually redeem the world from their sins. And these people missed it. How did they miss it? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here we go. Therefore, God, this is what I think we're forgetting, is that everybody longs to belong or to have a place called home. Everybody. You were created for this. Everybody desires this. They knew from day one that they were not supposed to be slaves. So for 400 years, they cried out to God and said, get us out of this misery, slavery. Once they got out of the slavery, they knew that the goal was not to avoid slavery, but to have a place of their own. So for 40 years, they journey, they wander through ups and downs and dysfunctionality and sin and redemption. And you know the story, until finally they make it home. Everybody desires a home. Listen to this. These are the commandments. Verse 1. Commandments, decrees and laws, the Lord your God directed me to teach you.